Hey everybody, how's it going? I'm back with a video today on how to make use of the Intangir's vanilla train network. So I just released this on Reddit and the Factorio forums along with blueprints. And so I better make a video explaining how to actually use it since there's a couple of parts that might not be obvious. So I'm going to go through my list of things to cover, and starting with setting up a depot computer. So the main feature that separates this system from some of the others is it's got a smart depot. I'm calling it a smart depot. It's got this big computer here. It carefully manages these trains, makes sure that it doesn't send out extra ones on any job. There should always only be just enough trains on the network to meet the current needs. So yeah, this computer is what takes care of that. So the first thing you want to do is set up all your lanes, set up a clean in and out, set up some of these signaling lights, all that sort of stuff, and then you put the depot in. And I'm going to go ahead and take this one out and replace it so we can kind of go through it together. And alright, so you go into your blueprints and you get your blueprint computer, and you want to line it up so that the power poles line up with the depot stalls where those are going to go. And you can just plop it down. And it'll have one of these big poles already connected when you lay it down. If you want to move it and line it up with something like so, what you do is you just connect the same wires. I got a green and two reds. So the green one comes from those two guys, and one of the reds comes from the very bottom, and one of them comes from right here. Oops, that's not it. This one. Alright, take the old one down. Okay. And then you hook it into your whole network. One of the requirements of this system is that the network needs both red and green, and your whole network needs to basically carry these signals. So I recommend using a set of blueprints for your tracks that has them already included. So whenever you lay these down, it'll already have your red and green wires, and you don't have to worry about that. Alright, so I hooked this in. Now we can see all the signals coming from the network. And these computers here will synchronize with those signals and send trains out and keep track of which ones have already been addressed and which ones haven't. Alright, let me go down my list here, set up depot lanes. Alright, so right now these depots aren't actually connected because I just replaced the computer. So I'm going to connect the rest of them. Generally, you'll just use one of these two blueprints. If you need more space, you can use this wide one. It pushes the combinators up and out of the way a little bit. And if you don't need extra space in between, you can use the thin depot. You can jam these lanes a lot closer. Alright, so now they're connected. You can see the ripple signal going through. These signals tell the trains to go out on runs for supply or demand. There's one pulse with one color and one commodity for each, signal that they need to possibly respond to. And if they don't respond, it just ripples down the way. All right. So let's see. So let's talk about configuring if you need to send trains for different kinds of commodities. So one of the things that's a little different about this smart depot is, since it needs to be able to send isolated signals for each commodity, you have to set up these little blocks. I've already set up a lot of the common commodities that would be under this tab right here, intermediate products. This is mostly what I send. And if you need to send anything else that's in any of these other tabs, like you want to send pipes, or you want to send some inserters or something, or fluids, this is the one you'll probably want to add, because I've been doing that myself. What you can do is you can either just replace one of these existing ones, just turn it off, and pick a thing, and you swap a new commodity, and make it match the same number that you're replacing. Turn it back on. Or if you need even more signals, just wire in a new block, a new constant combinator, and come in here and pick a new signal, and it needs to be unique. Each of these numbers is unique, and they have to be even. And unique, and they have to be under the total count, which is 80 right now, but you can increase that. So 70 is the current highest, so I'm going to change this to 72. I should have had that off when I added that, but oh well. 72, new signal. Now I'll be able to signal for light oil to the rest of the, to all the trains. And if you do need to add a whole ton of new signals and you need a lot more space, just come in here and change this to something bigger. It'll pulse all the trains a little slower though, so keep that in mind. You generally want to have it not much larger than what you need so that it sends the trains more responsively. But if you do customize your commodities and your counter, you're going to want to do it to all the depots. So you might want to copy and paste to each one. And that's, let's see, let me go through my notes. Multiple depots need more lanes than trains. Oh yeah, so you also need, you basically want to have enough lanes in your depots to hold every train that you have, plus some extras is good, because otherwise they're going to pile up and block the main road. One of the cool benefits of this network compared to some of the others is that it doesn't let extra trains run around your network when they're not needed somewhere. So you don't need any stackers before any of your stops along your network. You don't need stackers anywhere else, but you do need room for all your trains in your depot because they got to sit somewhere when they're not used. All right, I'll cover some more operations at the depot later for if things go wrong or if you want to make tweaks. I'll get into that after. But next, let's go ahead and set up a supply station. Because, there's the main three parts of the network is your depot and supply stations and request stations. And then I guess the actual circuit network itself. So here we are over at a location where we're supplying sulfur. And I'm going to set up a supply station here. Line it up with your chests. The way I do it is I've got 8 chests, 2 sets of 4 per car. You can customize this however you want. Just save your own new blueprints. This is the way the blueprint's set up though. You can change it however you want, but I'm just going to discuss for these specific numbers of chests and train cars, 2 train cars. And I've got some presets set up already for those sizes in mind. So these presets are set up for, this is 2 cars, 100 stacks each stack. In the 2 cars, that adds up to 8,000. If you're using 2 cars that are stacked, that have 50 stacks, that'll be 4,000. And this is for 1 car of 50 stacks, which I use for uranium. So I've got these presets in here. We're going to be dealing with sulfur, which is a 50 stack, and I'm doing 2 cars, so that'll be the 4,000. So I can get rid of the other. You don't need any of this crap in here either. I just put that in there for explanation. It'll ignore it, but it doesn't matter what's there or not. So now that defines a full load, and I need to define which signal this will send out whenever there's a full load, which is the sulfur. I'm going to use the sulfur. And you need to rename the station, but I'm going to do that later. I'll explain why later. So yeah, that's pretty much all we need to do, those 3 things. You define a load size, you define the signal, and we'll rename the train. And then we hook it up. It's ready to hook up. So it's sending a sulfur signal to the network, but that doesn't go anywhere yet. So I'm going to grab one of these poles, pull it over here, and I'm going to run a red wire and put it on the network, and now we can see there's a sulfur supply signal on the network. Yeah, you can also read your network from anywhere that you see one of these poles with the green or red. If it's part of your network, you can read all the supply is in red and all the demand is in green. So you can at a glance from anywhere in your network check what the status is. Alright, so I'm going to run over here and set up another station. Let me just check my notes. Set up a supply station, network needs red and green. Yeah, so I already covered the whole network needs red and green wires. That's a little different than like HTN. He compressed his down to only needing a red wire, but I actually needed more signaling bandwidth because I have I have to be able to synchronize multiple stations with each other. I mean, not multiple stations, multiple depots with each other. And also I wanted to support the skip stop, which I'll talk about later. So I needed more signaling bandwidth. And plus I just like that you can read the network from anywhere. You just look at one of these and you can see exactly what the supply and demand is. It's pretty convenient. But if you compress all your signals into high words and low words, then it makes it really, you can't really read it. Alright, so we're going to set up a request station, and let me just use one of these blueprints for laying out some tracks. And I'm going to go into request station and line it up, pop it down. Just run some power over here. And we need to configure the same few things. So we configure the demand. I got some presets just like before. These values represent the minimum amount that the station wants to have on hand for it to not bother signaling. And they're set the same way. So this is basically configured for 8 chests that are 8 chests that are full of stacks of 100. They'll add up to 38,400. So we basically minus 1 load, and if it goes under 1 load from full, it'll make a demand. So that's that preset. We're doing 50 stacks, so I'm going to leave that one on and get rid of that. And once again, you don't need any of this junk. You can leave it there, it doesn't matter. But yeah, you configure the load size, and you configure the signal that's going to send, and you'll configure the name. I'm going to do that in a second. Alright, so that's pretty much, oh, and then you got to hook it up. So this hooks up with the green wire. So I'm going to run this green wire, and you can see the demand signals carrying over onto the network. Alright, so now we've got both a supply and a demand or a request station. But we have no train, so let's hook up a train. Put down this train. The schedule is saved in the blueprint, so you don't have to manually set all this up. And there's a few things you need to set up. You need to change these signals to be the actual commodity you want to use for signaling it. And then you need to rename these stations. And the reason why I saved renaming these till last is because if there's already a train that has the station on its schedule, and then you rename it, it will update the train schedule. So I just renamed that station, and now it's renamed the schedule also. And this is the other one. If you had already renamed the train's stations before you put down your train, you can just rename it back to fish and then back to sulfur, or you could just add a new schedule. You just add a new station to the schedule, and you make sure to set the inactivity times. And another note about inactivity times is if you're using inserters, 1 second works fine. The inserters, they work within less than a second. But if you're using pumps for fluids, they take a few seconds to hook up, like 2 or 3 seconds. So if you are transporting fluids around, you need to change this to, I think I've been using 3. But if you're just using inserters, you can just leave it. And then I need to hook up some cars to this. Give it a little bit of fuel. You can put the trains wherever you want. I just usually pick a middle lane like this and drop it down. And that should be it. We need the signals and the station names. They're all set. So I'm going to turn it on and it'll get to work. So it should run over to the station and it'll load up on fuel, and then it'll wait for this sulfur supply signal. Let's see. It's loading up on fuel. See, these are the signals that are coming in, and now it's just responded to that signal. So if you can check that memory, the signal will be less than the network is indicating, because that's already been handled. It runs over here. Did I already mention, whenever you're actually at a station, it'll turn the station off and it'll turn the signal off. This makes sure extra trains. If somehow an extra train does get let off the leash at the wrong time, it'll just go right back to the depot. Alright, it's filled up. Now, the difference between this network and some of the others is trains will go back to the depot with the full load. So whenever one of the stations does signal that they have a demand, the train only has to come from the nearby depot rather than wherever the supply is, so it's a little quicker. But if you don't want to wait for one train to make the full round trip every time, you know, it's going to run out on a new supply run or demand, request run, just add more trains. I recommend adding more trains and always making sure that your supply outpaces your demand. It'll work even if it's under, if it's undersupplied and if you only have one train. But it's just smoother if you have extra trains and they're waiting around in the depot with the full load. So anyway, yeah, it ran out to the request station and unloaded. And watch this. As soon as it gets that signal, that'll go down. So you saw that supply memory went down on sulfur, but the network itself will actually still show sulfur. So they don't always match because sometimes some of the signals have already been addressed by the computer. But you don't really need to worry about that. 99.9% of the time everything should just work, and you won't really need to worry about how the depot works. Let me go through my notes here. Change it. Alright, yeah, so 99.9% of the time everything should just be fine. Oh, let me get back on there. I'm just going to ride this back to the depot. So for the small percentage of time that something does go wrong, I'll get into some of the advanced, notes on depot, issues. I'll have myself some notes for that. Don't manually launch trains. Oh yeah, if you notice that there's like a supply available and for some reason the train is either on the wrong phase or there's just not a signal here that matches the signal there, and you need to send a train out manually, don't do it. If you send one out like so, and this train takes off during another tick, it'll just cause more sync issues. So if you do, for some reason, need to manually adjust the trains launched, you can do it two ways. You could just add an extra constant combinator onto the main network line, green for demand and red for supply, and just put in one, turn it on and turn it off, and then it'll fire off a train. The default blueprint also has some circuits in it that work the same way. This is for manually incrementing a demand and manually decrementing demand. Generally you won't ever have to do that though. Like earlier I had connected and unconnected and then reconnected a coal supply node, and that led to a desync issue with the network. See, this one shows 3 coal available, but there's only actually 2 coal available. It's been like that for a really long time, and it's hurt nothing, so it's really not worth even bothering to fix. If there's more available than your network thinks, it might at some point send a train out when there's nothing to do. It'll just turn around and come back. It doesn't hurt anything. And it'll only send one at a time, so it'll stay out of sync for a really long time, but it'll still behave exactly as it should behave. So you really don't need to worry about that. But if you really wanted to, this depot here has been customized a little bit, so it doesn't have the manual correction combinators anymore. But what you would do is you would say add a coal in here and turn it on and off. But you pretty much will never need to do that. I haven't had to do it in so long. I took them off mine. This was mostly for during testing before I got it pretty well, streamlined. But yeah, there's a couple other things that can lead to sync errors. If you have 2 really big depots, like these are kind of big, and I have multiple trains per some commodities. If they show up in 2 different depots, like I have some iron ore over here and some iron ore over here, and based on the differences in the clock tick and based on the length of the ripple out to it, there's a small possibility that occasionally it'll send 2 trains out at once and double decrement your value in here, which will cause a synchronization issue with the network. If that does happen, and it happens a lot, you might want to resync your computer right here, your counter right here. And to do that, you just disconnect this red wire and reconnect it. You'll probably never need to do that though. These are advanced topics that should never come up. But if you're just planning on testing this out and playing around with it and using it, you don't really need to be watching this far into the video, because I've pretty much covered all the basic usage already. These are just for advanced, rare or advanced issues. Oh yeah, and if you need to configure more types of commodities, let's say you're using a mod which adds hundreds of new types of items, and you want to be able to deliver those, and there's not enough unique values that you can cram in under the 80 that I've set as the limit right now. You just add a higher maximum count to your counter, and you just add in more combinators as necessary. You can put more than one in each of these. You should always turn this off before you add things, but I didn't. I keep forgetting. But yeah, you just keep adding, just keep making sure you pick even numbers, and they're under the limit. But yeah, you can scale this up to hundreds of commodities. All right, that's pretty much all the other issues that might arise, or concerns that you might have, or things that you need to set up. I think I've covered it all. I hope people enjoy this network. I've been using it for a lot of hours now, and I've been totally ignoring it. It sits over here in the corner, and I've just been adding stations and trains and stations and trains, and it hasn't broken for a lot of hours. It's just been ticking along perfectly. So hopefully it'll work really well for you too, and hope you enjoy it. I put a lot of work into figuring out exactly how to lay out those signals and those combinators. They're really complicated. I mean, it took a lot of different trial and error with a lot of different methods of trying to signal the trains and make sure I was reading the right trains. But it's all worked out finally. It seems to be working perfectly well. I also have another feature in here called the skip stop that I don't even use. It's really not necessary. But the idea is that if you have one supply train and it's got to run way out there and you don't want to wait for it to go back to the depot, what you would do is you'd place it out here somewhere right after the supply station. And I'm not going to get into all of it, but you can basically hook this right after it, and you configure this to match the signal. This to match the signal of the commodity, and it'll turn this thing on and off based on whether there's actually a demand for it. And if there is, it should just go right into it, decrement it at the depot computers, and skip the depot entirely. But there's a couple of things that could arise if you use those. If they're anywhere near the rest of your network, other trains could try to path into them. That's why I only recommend it for trains that are way out here. Like say if I put one right here, and I didn't want to wait for the train to go all the way back to the depot before it came to deliver crude oil, I'd put one out there. But I have 2 crude oil trains, so I don't even need to worry about it. Instead, they'll generally always just sit around in the depot, and whenever demand arises, they'll just take off from here instead of having to path from way out here. So I don't really recommend using the skip stop. It's possible it could cause some other routing errors if they're remotely close to your network. It shouldn't, because there is a penalty for trains routing through other stations. So it shouldn't, but I don't even use them, and I don't think they're needed. But they're available if you want to experiment with them. Just don't put them too close to the rest of the network, and make sure they're downstream from a train track that has another station to kind of penalize their use for every other train other than the train that's running the supply for the skip stop. And that's it. Have a good one. See ya.